I should have known better than to trust a shortcut from a stranger, especially one that led through private property. But after 36 hours on the road, with my delivery window closing fast, I was desperate enough to try anything. The CB crackled to life as I neared the Missouri-Arkansas border, my eyes heavy from the monotony of I-55's endless asphalt ribbon. "Hey there, northbound, you look like you could use a break from this parking lot." The voice was gruff but friendly, tinged with the familiar drawl of a seasoned trucker. I keyed the mic, grateful for any distraction. "You got that right, been crawling along for hours." "Well, if you're headed to KC, I might have a little trick up my sleeve. Saved my bacon more times than I can count." My ears perked up. Kansas City was indeed my destination, and at this rate I'd be lucky to make it before my logbook ran out. "I'm listening," I replied, trying not to sound too eager. The voice chuckled. "All right, pay attention now. In about 5 miles, you'll see a beat-up billboard for Red's Bait and Tackle. Take the exit right after, follow the frontage road for about 3 miles, then hang a left on Old Mill Road. It ain't much to look at, but it'll shave a good hour off your trip." I hesitated. Unmarked roads were always a gamble, especially in a rig. "Sounds a bit sketchy. You sure it's truck-friendly?" "Heck, I've run it in a double trailer. Just keep your eyes peeled for the no trespassing signs. Stick to the main drag and you'll be fine." Against my better judgment, I found myself taking the exit. The frontage road was rough but passable, and true to the stranger's word, I soon came upon a weathered street sign marking Old Mill Road. As I made the turn, a flutter of unease rippled through my stomach. The pavement quickly gave way to gravel, then hard-packed dirt. Ancient oaks lined the narrow road, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that filtered the afternoon sun into dappled shadows. Despite the summer heat, a chill ran down my spine. I caught glimpses of faded red signs nailed to trees, their warnings barely legible beneath layers of rust and moss. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as the road narrowed further, forcing me to creep along at a crawl. Just as I was considering turning back, the trees opened up to reveal a sprawling field. In the distance, I could make out the silhouette of a dilapidated barn, its weather-beaten boards stark against the fading sky. Relief washed over me at the sight of open space, but it was short-lived. A glint of metal caught my eye, and I slammed on the brakes. Barely visible in the tall grass was the rusted-out shell of an old pickup truck. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the field was littered with abandoned vehicles, cars, trucks, and even the skeletal remains of what looked like an ancient semi. My heart pounded in my chest as I weighed my options. The road ahead seemed clear, but every instinct screamed at me to turn around. Before I could make a decision, movement in my side mirror made me freeze. A figure emerged from the tree line behind me, shambling with an unnatural gait. In the fading light, I couldn't make out details, but something about its proportions seemed wrong. As it drew closer, I could see it was easily 7 feet tall, with limbs too long and joints that bent in impossible ways. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life and I slammed the truck into gear, tires spinning in the loose dirt. As I fishtailed onto the road, more shapes emerged from the woods, loping alongside my rig with inhuman speed. I barreled down the narrow track, branches scraping against the sides of the trailer with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The CB erupted in a cacophony of static and distorted voices, none of them human. "Fresh meat. Been so long. Don't let it escape." I switched it off with shaking hands, focusing all my attention on the treacherous road ahead. In the growing darkness, shadows seemed to writhe and reach for the truck, and more than once I could have sworn I saw glowing eyes peering from the underbrush. After what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than minutes, I burst out onto a paved road. I didn't slow down, pushing the rig to its limits as I fled into the night. It wasn't until I saw signs for the interstate that I finally allowed myself to breathe. As I merged onto I-70, my hands still trembling, a thought struck me cold. I fumbled for my phone, pulling up the map. According to GPS, I was nearly 2 hours east of where I should have been, in the opposite direction of Kansas City. The cab felt suddenly claustrophobic, and I cracked the window, gulping in the cool night air. As my breathing slowed, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But I could still feel the phantom sensation of branches scraping against metal, still hear those inhuman voices crackling through the CB. I drove through the night in a daze, jumping at every shadow on the roadside. When I finally pulled into a truck stop outside St. Louis, the sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. As I climbed down from the cab on shaky legs, something caught my eye. My blood ran cold as I walked around to the side of the trailer. Long, deep gouges ran the length of the metal as if something with massive claws had tried to tear its way inside. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face in a futile attempt to clear my head. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the haggard face staring back at me. That's when I noticed it. A smear of something dark on the collar of my shirt. With trembling fingers, I pulled it aside to reveal 3 parallel scratches on my neck crusted with dried blood. The fluorescent lights flickered, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a towering, misshapen figure reflected in the mirror behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but found only empty air. Shaken to my core, I returned to my truck. There was no way I could sleep, not after what I'd experienced. I called my dispatcher, making up a story about mechanical troubles to explain my delay and detour. As I pulled back onto the highway, heading west at last, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. For weeks after, I was plagued by nightmares of twisted figures chasing me through endless dark woods. I'd wake in a cold sweat, the phantom sound of branches scratching against metal ringing in my ears. More than once, I caught myself scanning the tree line along the highway, half expecting to see those unnaturally long limbs and glowing eyes emerging from the shadows. I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, but every time I climbed into my rig, I'd run my fingers along those deep gouges in the trailer, a tangible reminder that something had happened out there on that lonely dirt road. I never took an unmarked shortcut again, no matter how pressing the deadline. And to this day, whenever I pass through Missouri, I find myself obsessively checking my GPS, terrified of making a wrong turn and finding myself back on that nightmare stretch of road. Sometimes late at night, when the CB is quiet and the road stretches empty before me, I swear I can still hear those distorted voices crackling through the static. Fresh meat. Been so long? Don't let it escape. And I drive a little faster, eyes locked on the safety of the horizon, praying that whatever I encountered out there remains trapped in those dark woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting trucker desperate enough to trust a shortcut from a stranger. The first howl pierced the night like a knife, sending a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the frigid Montana air. I'd heard wolves before, but this was something else entirely. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, eyes darting between the winding road ahead and the rearview mirror. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the snow-dusted pines that pressed in close on either side of the narrow highway. My rig's headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond their reach, shadows seemed to dance and writhe. I shook my head, trying to clear the cobwebs of a long night on the road. Just my imagination playing tricks, I told myself. But deep down, a primal part of me knew better. It had started as a routine haul Seattle to Chicago, a run I'd made 100 times before, but a massive pileup on I-90 forced me to detour onto this godforsaken stretch of backcountry highway. My GPS had gone haywire hours ago, leaving me to navigate by nothing more than faded road signs and my own questionable sense of direction. The CB had been silent for miles, not even the usual chatter of other truckers to keep me company. I'd tried calling out earlier, but only static answered. Now, as another bone-chilling howl echoed through the night, I wished desperately for any human voice. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a massive shape darting between the trees. My foot instinctively eased off the gas, heart pounding as I strained to see into the darkness. There again. This time I got a better look and my blood ran cold. It was a wolf, but wrong. Too big, its movements too fluid for an animal that size. As it loped alongside my truck, easily keeping pace, I could have sworn its eyes glowed with an unnatural amber light. I gunned the engine, the rig's horn blaring in panic as I rounded a sharp curve. The wolf, if that's what it truly was, vanished into the underbrush. But I could still feel its presence, an oppressive weight pressing in on all sides. Another howl split the air, closer this time, then another and another, a chorus of unearthly voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My palms were slick with sweat as I wrestled the truck around each bend, tires skidding dangerously close to the edge of the icy road. A sign flashed by. Welcome to Wolf Creek, Pop. 206. I'd never heard of the town, but right then it sounded like salvation. Civilization meant people, phones that worked, maybe even a sheriff's office, anything to escape the nightmare nipping at my heels. But as the minutes stretched on with no sign of town lights, dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Had I somehow missed a turn? The voracious sounds of pursuit grew ever closer, and I risked a glance in the side mirror. My heart nearly stopped. A pack of monstrous wolves ran alongside my rig, easily keeping pace despite my speedometer creeping towards 90. Their fur was a patchwork of shadow and moonlight, rippling over muscles far too massive for any normal canine. But it was their eyes that truly chilled me to the bone. Glowing orbs of amber fire, filled with a terrible intelligence. I let out a strangled yell as one of the beasts lunged for my cab. Massive jaws snapped shut inches from my window, leaving spiderweb cracks in the reinforced glass. I swerved hard, nearly jackknifing as the trailer fishtailed on the icy road. The wolves fell back, but I could hear their howls of frustration and hunger. They weren't giving up, not by a long shot. My mind raced, searching desperately for a plan. The town had to be close, but would I even make it that far? And who was to say I'd find help if I did? An icy tendril of fear wormed its way into my gut as I considered the possibility that Wolf Creek might be more than just a name. A fork in the road loomed ahead, and I had a split second to choose. Left seemed to wind further into the mountains, while right. I squinted through the windshield, hope surging as I caught a faint glimmer of light in the distance. I wrenched the wheel right, tires screaming in protest. The pack split, half peeling off to follow while the others continued straight. Their howls took on a note of triumph that sent shivers down my spine. The glimmer resolved into a single streetlight, illuminating a decrepit gas station. My spirits soared at this first sign of civilization, only to plummet as I took in the boarded-up windows and faded closed sign. Still, it was my only shot. I downshifted hard, brakes screeching as I pulled into the weed-choked lot. The wolves hesitated at the edge of the light, pacing and snarling. I didn't waste a second, grabbing the tire iron from under my seat as I flung open the cab door. My boots had barely hit the ground when a dark shape hurtled from the shadows. I swung blindly, feeling the satisfying crunch of metal on bone. The wolf yelped, momentarily stunned, and I used the opening to sprint for the gas station's door. Locked. Of course it was locked. I smashed the tire iron against the grimy glass, desperation lending strength to my blows. The pack circled warily, their glowing eyes never leaving me as they searched for an opening. The window finally gave way with a resounding crash. I dove through, heedless of the jagged shards tearing at my clothes and skin. Rolling to my feet, I slammed my body against a nearby vending machine, toppling it across the broken window. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it might buy me enough time to find a phone, a weapon, anything to tip the scales in my favor. The interior of the gas station was a study in decay. Shelves coated in dust, ancient merchandise faded and rotting. My flashlight beam caught a glint of metal behind the counter, and I vaulted over, heart soaring as my hand closed around the grip of a shotgun. My elation was short-lived. The gun was ancient, probably older than I was, and a quick check revealed it unloaded. I cursed, tossing it aside as I frantically searched for shells. A menacing growl froze me in place. I slowly raised my head, coming face to face with a nightmarish visage. One of the wolves had managed to squeeze through a gap in the barricade, its massive form barely fitting in the narrow space behind the counter. We locked eyes, and in that moment I knew this was no ordinary animal. There was an intelligence there, cruel and calculating. Its lips pulled back in a mockery of a grin, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. I didn't think, just reacted. My hand closed around a dusty bottle of whiskey, and I smashed it across the beast's snout. It yelped, momentarily stunned, and I used the precious seconds to vault back over the counter. The vending machine groaned as the rest of the pack threw their weight against it. I cast about wildly, searching for anything I could use as a weapon or barricade. My eyes fell on a door marked Office, and I made a mad dash for it. The knob turned easily under my hand, a small mercy in a night sorely lacking them. I slammed it shut behind me, dragging a heavy metal desk across the threshold. It wouldn't hold them for long, but maybe long enough for me to find a way out of this nightmare. The office was small, windowless, lit only by the beam of my flashlight. An old rotary phone sat on the desk, and I snatched it up, praying for a dial tone. Silence. The line was as dead as my hopes for rescue. A thunderous crash from the other room told me the wolves had broken through. Claws scrabbled against the office door as they caught my scent. The desk shuddered with each impact, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through. My light fell on a trapdoor in the floor, half hidden under a ratty area rug. With nothing left to lose, I heaved it open, gagging at the musty odor that wafted up. A rickety ladder descended into darkness. The choice was clear: face the wolves or take my chances below. I lowered myself onto the ladder just as the office door splintered. Fur-covered limbs thrust through the gap, claws raking the air mere inches from my face. I scrambled down the ladder, not caring where it led as long as it was away from those snapping jaws. The trapdoor slammed shut above me, plunging me into total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight with shaking hands, nearly sobbing with relief when it flickered to life. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel stretching into the distance. The earth was packed hard beneath my feet, the walls reinforced with ancient timbers. Some kind of old mining shaft, maybe? I had no time to ponder its origins. A muffled howl from above spurred me into motion, and I set off down the tunnel at a stumbling run. The sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the pounding of my heart and the rasp of my labored breathing. I don't know how long I ran, time losing all meaning in that lightless underground realm. My legs burned, lungs on fire, but terror kept me moving forward. The tunnel branched and twisted, and more than once I found myself at a dead end, forced to backtrack. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, a faint glow caught my eye. Hope surged as I rounded a corner to find moonlight spilling down a steep incline. An exit! I scrambled up the slope on hands and knees, emerging into a snow-dusted clearing. The crisp night air had never tasted so sweet. I gulped it down, scanning my surroundings for any sign of the pack. The forest stood silent, no hint of my pursuers. Had I lost them in the maze below, or were they still down there, searching for my trail? A distant howl answered my unspoken question. They were coming. I turned in a slow circle, desperation clawing at my throat. That's when I saw it, the welcoming glow of lights through the trees. Civilization, real this time. I ran, branches whipping my face as I crashed through the underbrush. The howls grew louder, spurring me to speeds I didn't know I was capable of. I burst from the tree line onto the shoulder of a highway, my legs nearly giving out as I stumbled onto blessed pavement. Headlights appeared in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically. The 18-wheeler slowed, and I could have wept at the sight of another human face peering down at me from the cab. "You all right, buddy?" the driver called, concern etched on his weathered features. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat as a chorus of howls erupted from the forest behind me. The other trucker's eyes widened in alarm. "Get in!" he shouted, already reaching across to fling open the passenger door. I didn't need to be told twice. I clambered into the cab, slamming the door shut just as dark shapes emerged from the trees. The driver gunned the engine, tires squealing as we peeled away. I watched in the side mirror as the pack melted back into the shadows. Their glowing eyes seemed to follow us long after they should have faded from view. "Name's Mike," the driver said, breaking the tense silence. "Want to tell me what the hell that was all about?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. How could I even begin to explain? He'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was. "Wrong turn," I managed finally, my voice hoarse. "Ended up somewhere I shouldn't have been." Mike nodded slowly, worry still etched on his face. "Well, you're safe now. We'll hit Billings in about an hour. You can tell your story to the cops there if you want." I sank back in the seat, exhaustion finally catching up with me. As the adrenaline faded, the events of the night took on a dreamlike quality. Had it really happened? Or had my mind conjured up those monstrous wolves, born from too many hours alone on dark roads? But as I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the familiar rumble of the engine, one thought persisted. I would never look at a rural shortcut the same way again. The Big Joe's 24/7's truck stop sign flickered weakly in the pre-dawn gloom, a beacon of hope after hours of mind-numbing highway. I pulled my rig into the nearly empty lot, desperate for a hot meal and a chance to stretch my legs. Little did I know I was about to check into the Hotel California of truck stops. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as I stepped into the diner, the aroma of coffee and grease enveloping me like a familiar blanket. A handful of patrons hunched over steaming mugs at the counter, their weary eyes barely registering my entrance. I slid into a worn vinyl booth, the cracked leather sighing beneath my weight. "What'll it be, hun?" The waitress materialized beside me, coffee pot in hand. Her name tag read Darlene, though the faded lettering suggested she'd been wearing it since before I was born. "Coffee black and whatever's hot on the grill," I mumbled, fumbling for my wallet. Darlene's pen scratched across her notepad. "You got it, sugar. You look like you could use a break from the road." I nodded, gratitude warming me almost as much as the coffee she poured. "Been pushing 16 hours straight. This place is a godsend." A shadow passed over Darlene's face, so quick I almost missed it. "Well, you just sit tight and refuel. Plenty of time to rest up here." The eggs and hash browns arrived in record time, and I dug in with the ferocity of a man who'd been subsisting on vending machine fare and gas station coffee. As I ate, I found my gaze drawn to the window, where the lot seemed hazier than it had when I'd arrived. Must be fog rolling in, I thought, though something about the way it clung to my truck made me uneasy. Belly full and legs still protesting the idea of climbing back into the cab, I decided to take advantage of the shower facilities. The restroom was surprisingly clean for a truck stop, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a harsh, sterile glow. As I emerged, toweling off my hair, I noticed the diner had filled up considerably. Truckers of all shapes and sizes occupied nearly every booth and stool, a low murmur of conversation punctuated by the clinking of cutlery. Strange, I thought. I hadn't heard any rigs pulling in. I made my way back to my booth, only to find it occupied by a grizzled old-timer nursing a mug of coffee. "Sorry, friend," I said, "I think you've got my spot." The man looked up at me with rheumy eyes. "Ain't no assigned seats here, boy. Plenty of room elsewhere." Frowning, I turned to scan the diner. He was right. Despite the crowd, there always seemed to be an empty booth or stool just waiting to be filled. I slid into the nearest vacant seat, an odd sense of unease settling in my gut. "Ready to head out?" Darlene appeared at my elbow, coffee pot at the ready. I checked my watch, startled to see nearly 2 hours had passed since I'd arrived. "Yeah, I should get back on the road. What do I owe you?" Darlene waved off my attempt to pay. "First meal's on the house, hun. Consider it a welcome gift." "That's mighty kind, but I can't—" "I insist," she cut me off, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You just come see me when you're ready for seconds." The fog had thickened considerably as I made my way back to my rig. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and sounds seemed muffled as if coming from far away. I climbed into the cab, firing up the engine with a sense of relief. Time to put this strange little oasis in my rear view. Except the exit wasn't where I remembered it. I cruised slowly through the lot, peering through the soup-like fog for any sign of the road. After 10 minutes of fruitless searching, I pulled back into my original spot, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. Inside the diner, it was as if I'd never left. The same patrons hunched over the same meals, the same quiet murmur of conversation filling the air. Darlene looked up as I entered, that same almost smile on her face. "Back so soon, sugar? Road not agreeing with you?" I slumped onto a stool at the counter. I can't find the exit," I admitted, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. "The fog's so thick out there, I can't see a damn thing." A heavy hand clapped me on the shoulder, and I turned to find the old-timer from earlier standing beside me. "Don't you worry none about that," he said, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. "Happens to all of us at first. You'll get used to it." "Used to what?" I asked, a tendril of fear curling in my chest. He just chuckled, sliding onto the stool next to me. "Order yourself another coffee, son. Looks like you might be here a while." The hours blurred together, marked only by the endless refills of my coffee mug and the steady stream of truckers flowing in and out of the diner. I tried to leave half a dozen times, each attempt more frantic than the last. But no matter which direction I drove, I always ended up right back where I started. My phone was useless, the screen showing no signal. The radio in my cab picked up nothing but static, occasionally broken by snatches of music or voices that sounded like they were coming from another time entirely. As the panic started to set in, I cornered Darlene during a rare lull in her rounds. "What the hell is going on here?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. "Why can't I leave?" For the first time, her cheerful facade cracked, revealing a bone-deep weariness beneath. "Oh, honey," she sighed, "I wish I had an answer for you. But the truth is, none of us know why we're here or how to leave. We just are." I staggered back, my mind reeling. "How long?" I managed to choke out. "How long have you been here?" Darlene's brow furrowed in concentration. "It's hard to say. Time doesn't work quite right here, but I reckon it's been a while." I stumbled out into the parking lot, gulping down air that felt too thick in my lungs. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of dream, a hallucination brought on by too many hours on the road. I pinched myself, hard enough to draw blood, but nothing changed. The fog still pressed in from all sides. The diner still glowed with its false promise of comfort. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. I lost track after the first few attempts to keep a tally on napkins that always seemed to disappear when I wasn't looking. I got to know the other residents of Big Joe's. There was Tom, the old-timer who'd first welcomed me to this purgatory. Maria, a former long-haul driver with a wicked sense of humor, and dozens of others, each with their own story of how they'd ended up here. We swapped theories over endless cups of coffee. Some thought we were dead, this truck stop our own personalized afterlife. Others believed we'd slipped through some kind of crack in reality, trapped in a pocket dimension. A few of the more scientific-minded among us talked about quantum entanglement and parallel universes, their eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. I tried everything I could think of to escape. I walked for hours in every direction, only to find myself back at the diner, my clothes bone dry despite the ever-present fog. I attempted to siphon enough gas from the other trucks to make a run for it, but my tank never seemed to empty no matter how far I drove. In moments of desperation, I even considered more drastic measures, but something always held me back, a stubborn flicker of hope that there had to be a way out. The truly maddening part was how normal everything seemed on the surface. The grill never stopped working, the coffee was always hot, and the showers never ran out of hot water. It was as if some cosmic being had created the platonic ideal of a truck stop and then decided to use it as a hamster cage for lost souls. I found myself falling into a routine, if you could call it that. I'd wake up in my truck, head to the diner for breakfast, then spend hours tinkering with my rig or swapping stories with the others. Sometimes I'd make another futile attempt at escape, more out of obligation than any real hope of success. It was during one of these attempts, maybe my 100th, that something changed. I was walking the perimeter of the lot, more out of habit than anything else, when I noticed a break in the fog. Just the faintest thinning, but it was enough to quicken my pulse. I moved closer, hardly daring to breathe. As I approached, the fog seemed to part like a curtain, revealing a stretch of highway I'd never seen before. My heart leapt into my throat as I broke into a run, terrified that this chance would slip away if I hesitated. As I burst through the barrier of fog, the world seemed to shimmer and twist around me. For a moment I was everywhere and nowhere at once, my body stretched across 1,000 realities. Then with a snap like a rubber band, everything snapped back into focus. I found myself standing on the shoulder of a highway, my rig idling a few feet away. The Big Joe's 24/7 truck stop sign flickered weakly in the pre-dawn gloom, but it looked different now, older, more run down. A for sale sign hung crookedly in the window of the diner. Shaking, I climbed into my cab and fired up the engine. As I pulled away, I chanced to glance in my rearview mirror. The truck stop shimmered like a mirage, and for just a moment I could have sworn I saw Darlene standing in the doorway, raising her coffee pot in a final salute. I drove for hours, terrified that if I stopped, I'd find myself right back where I started. It wasn't until I rolled into a bustling truck stop outside of Omaha that I finally allowed myself to believe I was free. As I sipped a cup of mediocre coffee and waited for my burger, I found myself missing the easy camaraderie of Big Joe's. Had it all been some kind of shared delusion? A mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion and loneliness? Or had I really spent, how long? Weeks? Months? Trapped in that otherworldly way station? I never got answers to those questions. But from that day on, I was a changed man. I savored every mile of open road, every new face I encountered. And if I sometimes found myself scanning truck stop signs for a familiar name, well, that was my little secret. Because the truth is, a part of me will always be back there, sharing a cup of coffee with the lost souls of Big Joe's, waiting for our chance to rejoin the flow of time and find our way home, The first time I heard the dead man's voice crackle through my CB radio, I nearly drove my rig off the road. It wasn't the static-laden quality of the transmission that shook me. That's par for the course when you're hauling across the lonely stretches of the American Midwest. No, what sent ice water through my veins was the fact that I recognized the voice. It belonged to old Jack Henderson, a fellow trucker I'd shared more than a few miles with over the years. The same old Jack who'd wrapped his Peterbilt around a highway pylon outside Tulsa 2 years ago. I'd been on the road for the better part of 14 hours, the monotony of I-80 stretching endlessly before me. Nebraska had given way to Wyoming an hour back, and I was looking forward to catching some shut-eye at the next truck stop. The radio had been quiet for miles, not unusual for this time of night, then cutting through the silence like a knife. Breaker 1, 9, this is Midnight Rider. Any of you lot got eyes on a way station coming up? Over. My hand froze halfway to the radio. That drawl, the way he pronounced lot like it had 2 syllables, it was old Jack, clear as day, but it couldn't be. I'd been to the man's funeral, for Christ's sake. I keyed the mic, my voice hardly more than a whisper. Come back, Midnight Rider. You say you're looking for a way station? There was a burst of static, then that impossible voice again. That's a Big 10-4, good buddy. Scales are giving me hell tonight. Need to make sure I'm legal before I hit the Colorado line. My mind raced. The Colorado line? We were at least 200 miles from Colorado. And why was Jack worried about being overweight? His last run had been, well, his last run. Midnight Rider, what's your 20? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Another burst of static, longer this time. When Jack's voice came back, it sounded fainter, like he was moving away. Just past the Rollins exit, good buddy. You must be running deaf and blind if you can't see my taillights. I'm the only soul on this stretch of road. I glanced at my GPS. Rollins was a good 50 miles behind me, and apart from a few pinpricks of light way off in my rear view, the highway was deserted. Jack, I said, abandoning CB protocol in my confusion, is that really you? How are you on this channel? The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When Jack's voice finally crackled through again, it was thick with static and something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Who's this? How do you know my name? The friendly drawl was gone, replaced by a sharp edge of suspicion. I don't recognize your voice, good buddy, and I know every driver on this route. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could key the mic, another voice cut in. This one was higher, younger, and achingly familiar. Daddy, is that you? My blood ran cold. It was Jenny, my little girl who'd been taken by leukemia when she was only 8 years old, 5 years ago. Jenny? I choked out, my vision blurring with sudden tears. Baby, where are you? I'm scared, Daddy, her voice came through, small and tinny. It's so dark here. Can you come get me? I was openly weeping now, one hand on the wheel, the other white-knuckled around the CB mic. Jenny, sweetheart, tell me where you are. I'll come find you, I promise. But instead of Jenny's voice, it was old Jack who responded. Now hold on just a minute, he growled, his tone dangerous. Who the hell are you? And what are you doing talking to my daughter? His daughter? Jack had never had kids. He'd always said the road was his only mistress. Before I could even begin to untangle that impossibility, a cacophony of voices erupted from the radio. Men and women, young and old, all talking over each other in a dizzying babel of accents and CB lingo. I caught snatches of conversation, arguments over directions, warnings about speed traps, jokes I'd heard 1,000 times in 1,000 truck stops. But undercutting it all was a sense of wrongness, locations that didn't match up with where I knew I was, references to things that were years out of date, and sometimes in the background what sounded like screaming. I slammed the radio off, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck straight. What the hell was happening? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew in my gut that this was something else, something that defied explanation. I white-knuckled it to the next rest stop, my mind reeling. As soon as I'd put it in park, I was out of the cab, gulping down the crisp night air like a drowning man. The lot was nearly empty, just a couple of other rigs and a beat-up Winnebago. I paced back and forth, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. It was impossible. Ghosts didn't exist. And even if they did, they sure as hell didn't use CB radios. I was exhausted, that was all. My mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the sound of Jenny's voice. So real, so close, like I could reach out and touch her. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I climbed back into the cab. My hand hovered over the radio. Part of me was desperate to turn it on, to hear those voices again, especially Jenny's. But another part, the part that had kept me alive on these roads for 20 years, was screaming at me to leave it off, to forget this ever happened. In the end, curiosity won out. I switched it on. Silence. I flipped through the channels, hearing nothing but static and the occasional snippet of normal trucker chatter. No old Jack, no Jenny, no chorus of impossible voices. I slumped in my seat, equal parts relieved and disappointed. It had been a hallucination then, brought on by too many hours on the road and the guilt I still carried over not being there when Jenny passed. I was about to switch off the radio and try to get some sleep when a burst of static made me jump. Then clear as a bell. "Daddy, are you there?" Jenny. My hand moved of its own accord, grabbing the mic. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking. "Where are you?" "I don't know," she said, and the fear in her voice broke my heart. "It's dark and I'm cold. There are others here. They're scared too." "Others?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Who, baby? Who's there with you?" There was a long pause, filled only with the soft hiss of static. Then so quietly I had to strain to hear. "The lost ones. The ones who never made it home." A chill ran down my spine. "Jenny, I don't understand. What do you mean, never made it home?" Another voice cut in, gruff and impatient. Old Jack again. "She means us drivers, you damn fool. The ones who bought it out here on the asphalt. The ones whose last thoughts were of missed deliveries and lonely truck stops." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. And yet, "Jack," I said slowly, "you've been dead for 2 years. I was at your funeral." A bitter laugh came through the speaker. "Yeah, well, funeral didn't take, did it? None of ours did. We're stuck out here riding these phantom highways for all eternity." "But why?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why are you contacting me?" It was Jenny who answered, her voice small and far away. "Because you can hear us, Daddy. Not everyone can. We've been trying for so long, but most people just hear static." I felt a lump form in my throat. What do you want me to do?" There was a long silence, broken only by the soft crackle of static. When Jack's voice came back, it was softer, almost pleading. "Remember us," he said. "Tell our stories. Don't let us fade away out here." "And Daddy," Jenny's voice, clearer now, "don't join us, not yet. Live for me, okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to the voices of the dead, sharing their final moments, their regrets, their unfinished business. I don't know how long I sat there, but by the time the voices faded and the radio went silent, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. I've heard them many times since that night, not every trip, and never for very long, but often enough to know it wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I've learned to listen for the telltale static, the way the voices seem to echo as if coming from a great distance. I've told their stories just like Jack asked, in truck stops and diners, over late-night coffees and early morning breakfasts. Some folks think I'm crazy. Others just nod and share stories of their own. Strange transmissions picked up in the dead of night, familiar voices that couldn't possibly be there. And every time I get behind the wheel, I think of Jenny's last words to me. "Live for me," she said. So I do. I drive carefully, I take my breaks, I don't push myself past my limits, because someday I'll see my little girl again. But not yet. Not out here on these haunted highways. For now, I'll keep driving and listening for the voices of the lost ones, riding the ghostly airwaves of the night. The first time I saw them, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A group of children standing stock still by the side of the road in the dead of night. Their pale faces glowed in my headlights for just a moment before I roared past, my rig kicking up a cloud of dust in its wake. I blinked hard, convinced it was just another hallucination brought on by too many hours behind the wheel. But as the miles rolled by, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something about those kids wasn't right. I'd been driving Route 87 for the better part of 2 decades, hauling everything from produce to machine parts across the heartland. It was a lonely stretch of road, cutting through miles of farmland and forgotten towns. But it paid well, and I'd grown accustomed to the solitude. Or so I thought. It was on my next run about a week later that I saw them again. Same spot, same eerie stillness. This time I slowed down, squinting through the darkness. There were 5 of them, 3 boys and 2 girls, dressed in clothes that looked at least 50 years out of date. They didn't move as I approached, didn't even seem to blink, just stared straight ahead with eyes that reflected my headlights like animals caught in a trap. I should have kept driving, should have radioed it in, let the cops deal with whatever sick game was being played out here. But something made me pull over, the air brakes hissing as I brought the rig to a stop on the shoulder. "Hey!" I called out, leaning out the window. "You kids all right? Where are your parents?" No response. They didn't even turn to look at me. A chill ran down my spine, and I found myself reaching for the door handle. As my boots hit the asphalt, a wave of cold washed over me. It was mid-July, but suddenly I could see my breath misting in the air. I took a tentative step towards the children. "Listen, it's not safe out here. Why don't you let me call someone to come get you?" Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, they turned to face me. Their eyes, God, their eyes, hollow and dark like windows into an empty house. The smallest boy, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, opened his mouth. No sound came out, but I could have sworn I heard a whisper on the wind. "Help us." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't natural. I scrambled back into the cab, threw the rig into gear, and peeled out onto the highway. In my mirror, I could see them watching me go. Those lifeless eyes following until I rounded a bend and they disappeared from view. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those kids standing there, silent and still as statues. I told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe mixed with a little guilt over all the birthdays and school plays I'd missed with my own kids over the years. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I started asking around, casual-like, at truck stops and diners along my route. "Hey, you ever see anything weird out on 87, like maybe some kids hanging around at night?" Most folks just gave me odd looks or nervous laughs, but every once in a while, I'd see a flicker of recognition in someone's eyes. They'd lean in close, voices dropping to a whisper, and share their own encounters. Always the same stretch of road, always at night. Always those 5 kids staring with eyes that didn't seem quite human. It was old Pete, a grizzled veteran of the roads who'd been driving since before I was born, who finally gave me some answers. We were sharing a cup of coffee at a dingy diner just outside of Omaha when I brought it up. Pete's face went pale and he set down his mug with a shaking hand. "You've seen them then," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded and he sighed heavily. "It was back in '72, he began, his voice low. "School bus full of kids on their way home. Driver had a heart attack at the wheel, sent them careening off the road. 5 of them didn't make it." My blood ran cold. 5 kids? Pete nodded grimly. 3 boys, 2 girls. They say the spirits never left that stretch of highway, waiting for someone to help them, I reckon, to set them free. I wanted to dismiss it as an old trucker's tale, the kind of story we tell to keep ourselves awake on long, lonely nights. But I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, that whispered plea for help. For weeks, I avoided Route 87 like the plague. Took longer routes, made excuses to my dispatcher about construction and traffic. But eventually, a lucrative haul came up that I couldn't pass on. It would take me right past that spot in the dead of night. The needle on my fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty as I pulled into Brimstone's Edge truck stop. The neon sign flickered weakly against the darkening sky, half its letters burnt out so it read, BRM Tones EGE. Any other day I would have kept driving, but when you're running on fumes in the middle of nowhere, you don't get to be picky. I'd been on the road for 18 hours straight, pushing hard to make up time after a pileup on I-40 threw my schedule into chaos. My eyes burned from the endless stretch of asphalt, and my back ached from too many hours in the driver's seat. All I wanted was to fuel up, grab some coffee, and get back on the road. As I maneuvered my rig into the deserted lot, something felt off. The air was thick and heavy like the moments before a summer storm, but the sky above was clear. An oppressive silence hung over the place, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my tires. The fuel station looked like it had seen better days decades ago. Rust streaked down the pumps, and weeds pushed up through cracks in the concrete. But beggars can't be choosers, and my options were limited to this or being stranded in the middle of the desert. I climbed down from the cab, wincing as my joints protested the sudden movement. The metal handle of the pump was ice cold despite the lingering heat of the day. As I began to fuel up, I scanned my surroundings. The truck stop was eerily empty. No other vehicles, no signs of life in the dimly lit convenience store. Just vast expanses of scrubland stretching out in every direction, broken only by the distant silhouette of mountains against the horizon. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone almost before I registered it. I turned, peering into the gathering gloom. Nothing but shadows and dust. I shook my head, chuckling at my own jumpiness. Too many hours on the road and too many late-night horror flicks were playing tricks on my mind. The pump clicked off, and I replaced the nozzle with a sigh of relief. At least now I wouldn't be stranded out here. I was debating whether to risk the convenience store for coffee when I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My hand froze on the truck door as I scanned the darkness. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the scrape of claws on gravel. Heart pounding, I yanked open the door and scrambled into the cab, slamming it shut behind me. Through the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows by the fuel pumps. Something big. With shaking hands, I fumbled for the keys, nearly dropping them in my haste. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the gloom. And there, illuminated in the harsh glare, was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It was massive, easily the size of a bear, but with a form that defied easy classification. Its body was a patchwork of scales and matted fur, limbs too long and joints that bent at unnatural angles. But it was the face that froze the blood in my veins, a twisted amalgamation of wolf and reptile, with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the headlights. For a moment we stared at each other, predator and prey locked in a standoff. Then its maw opened, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth, and it lunged for the truck. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, tires squealing as I peeled out of the lot. The creature's claws scrabbled against the side of the trailer, leaving deep gouges in the metal. In the mirror, I saw it give chase, moving with a speed that something that size had no right to possess. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel as I pushed the rig to its limits, the engine groaning in protest. But no matter how fast I went, those glowing eyes remained fixed on me in the darkness. Miles flew by, the featureless desert blurring into a monotonous haze. Still, the creature pursued. It should have been impossible. No living thing could maintain that pace for so long. But every time I dared to hope I'd lost it, I'd catch another glimpse in my mirror, always just behind me. As the adrenaline began to fade, my mind raced. What the hell was that thing? Some kind of escaped exotic pet driven mad by the desert heat? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress? Or something else entirely, something that defied rational explanation? I fumbled for the CB radio, desperate to hear another human voice. Breaker 1, 9, this is Sidewinder. Anybody out there? Over. Nothing but static answered me. I tried again, my voice edged with panic. This is an emergency. I'm being chased by something big, fast. Looks like it crawled out of hell itself. Anybody copy? More static, then a burst of laughter cut through. Sounds like somebody's been dipping into their own cargo, good buddy, a voice drawled. What you been hauling, moonshine? I'm serious, I snapped. This thing is real and it's right on my tail. I just fueled up at Brimstone's edge and... The laughter cut off abruptly. When the voice came back, all traces of amusement were gone. Did you say Brimstone's edge? Yeah, that old truck stop out in the middle of nowhere. Why? A long pause, filled only with the crackle of static. When the voice returned, it was low and urgent. Listen to me carefully. That place ain't been open for business in 30 years, not since a lot of folks went missing out that way. You need to get off that road, now. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean missing? What the hell is going on? But only static answered me. I tried other channels, growing more frantic with each attempt, but there was nothing, as if the world beyond my headlights had ceased to exist. A bone-jarring impact rocked the trailer, nearly sending me off the road. In the mirror, I saw the creature clinging to the back of the rig, those hellish eyes locked on me as it began to climb. Panic clouded my thoughts. I couldn't outrun this thing, that much was clear. And I couldn't keep driving forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to stop, and then... A memory surfaced. An old trucker's tale I'd heard years ago, back when I was first starting out. A story about a stretch of highway where the laws of reality didn't quite apply, where you could drive for hours and never reach the end unless you knew the trick. It was crazy, the desperate fantasy of a mind pushed to its limits, but as those claws inched closer, scratching at my window, I realized I was out of options. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for just a moment, and spoke aloud. This is not real. This road does not exist. I choose to wake up now. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the world shifted. It was like someone had pulled a curtain aside, revealing the true nature of things. The desert shimmered and faded, replaced by the familiar outlines of truck stop parking lot. I blinked, disoriented. I was back at Brimstone's edge, my rig idling peacefully at the pump. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, bathing everything in a warm golden glow. There was no sign of the creature, no claw marks on my trailer. Just an ordinary run-down truck stop coming to life as a new day dawned. A tap on my window made me jump. An old man peered up at me, his face weathered by years on the road. "You all right there, son? Looked like you were having one hell of a nightmare." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I explain what I'd just experienced? Yeah, must have dozed off while fueling up. Thanks for checking on me. He nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Happens to the best of us. Word of advice, don't push yourself so hard. These roads, they have a way of playing tricks on a tired mind. And some of those tricks can follow you if you're not careful. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. I glanced at my fuel gauge, full, just as I remembered. But the clock on my dashboard showed that nearly 8 hours had passed since I'd pulled in. I've replayed that night 1,000 times in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Was it all just an exhaustion-fueled dream? A vivid hallucination? Or something more sinister? A glimpse into a world beyond our own, where nightmares roam free and reality bends to their will? I don't have answers, but I do know this. I never drive past sunset anymore if I can help it. And if I see a sign for Brimstone's Edge, no matter how empty my tank might be, I keep on driving. Because some truck stops are better left in the rearview mirror, and some beasts are best left to the realm of dreams. The last anyone ever saw of Big Mike was his rig pulling into the Sunny Grove rest area off I-40 in eastern Arizona. That's what they tell me anyway. I was there that night, and I know there's more to the story. Much more. It was a scorcher that day, even by Arizona standards. I remember the heat waves shimmering off the asphalt as I guided my Peterbilt into the rest area around 9 p.m. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, but the air still felt thick and oppressive. Sweat trickled down my back as I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, pushing hard to make a deadline in Albuquerque. My eyes felt gritty, and my lower back ached something fierce. All I wanted was to splash some water on my face, grab a cold drink from the vending machine, and maybe catch a quick power nap before hitting the road again. The rest area was quiet, just a handful of trucks and a couple of RVs scattered around the lot. As I trudged towards the restroom building, I noticed a cherry-red Kenworth pulling in. It was a beauty of a rig, chrome gleaming even in the dim light of the parking lot. The driver who hopped out was a big fella, and I mean big. He must have stood close to 7 feet tall with shoulders like a linebacker. I gave him a nod as we passed each other. "Evening," he rumbled, his voice as deep as a well. "Evening," I replied. "Nice rig you got there." He beamed, pride evident in his craggy face. "That's my baby. Treat her right and she'll never let you down." He stuck out a meaty hand. "Name's Mike. Friends call me Big Mike for obvious reasons." I shook his hand, feeling dwarfed. "Jim, good to meet you, Mike." We chatted for a few minutes about routes and traffic. Mike mentioned he was hauling a load of electronics to Memphis. "Gonna grab a quick bite and a bit of shut-eye," he said, jerking his thumb towards the vending machines. "Got a long night ahead." I wished him safe travels and headed into the restroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shock some alertness back into my system. I must have zoned out for a minute because the next thing I knew, I heard a muffled shout from outside. Frowning, I stepped out of the restroom, my eyes scanning the parking lot. Everything looked peaceful at first glance. Then I noticed the driver's side door of Mike's Kenworth standing wide open. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the night. Something felt off. I walked over to Mike's truck, calling out as I approached. "Hey, Mike, everything okay?" No answer. The cab was empty. I peered into the sleeper berth, but it was undisturbed. Mike's logbook sat open on the passenger seat, a pen resting on top. His phone was plugged into the charger. My uneasiness grew. I did a quick circuit of the rest area, checking the vending machines, the picnic tables, even the dumpsters behind the building. No sign of Big Mike. Just as I was about to chalk it up to him taking a walk to stretch his legs, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. There, in the gravel near the edge of the lot, was a single boot print. But it wasn't just the print that got to me. It was the way the gravel around it looked, melted, like someone had taken a blowtorch to it. I stood there staring at that boot print for I don't know how long. My mind kept trying to come up with rational explanations, but none of them fit. It was like Mike had just vanished into thin air. Finally, I shook myself out of my daze and pulled out my phone to call 911. As I waited for the cops to arrive, I kept expecting Big Mike to come strolling back, maybe from a hidden trail I hadn't noticed. But the minutes ticked by and the rest area remained eerily quiet. The state trooper who showed up, a no-nonsense woman named Officer Martinez, took my statement and did her own sweep of the area. I could tell she was skeptical, probably figuring Mike had just wandered off or hitched a ride with someone. But when I showed her that melted boot print, I saw a flicker of something. Uncertainty, maybe even fear, cross her face. "I've never seen anything like this," she muttered, crouching down to examine it closer. More cops arrived, and soon the rest area was crawling with flashlight beams and murmured conversations. They brought in dogs to try and pick up Mike's scent, but the animals just whined and refused to go near that boot print. I sat on a picnic table, watching the commotion and trying to process what I'd witnessed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling hollow and shaky. A young deputy brought me a cup of coffee, and I clutched it like a lifeline. "You okay, sir?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain the growing certainty in my gut that something truly inexplicable had happened here? As the night wore on, more details emerged that only deepened the mystery. Mike's wallet and keys were found in his cab, along with his half-eaten sandwich. His logbook showed he'd arrived at 9:17 p.m., less than 10 minutes before I'd pulled in. The cops checked the security cameras, but wouldn't you know it, they'd malfunctioned earlier that day. The last clear footage was from around noon. I overheard snippets of the officers' conversations. They were clearly baffled. No signs of struggle, no blood, no drag marks. It was like Big Mike had simply blinked out of existence. Around 3 a.m., a fancy SUV pulled up and two men in dark suits got out. They flashed badges at Officer Martinez and had a hushed conversation. Next thing I knew, I was being asked to give my statement again, this time to one of the suit-wearing fellows. He introduced himself as Agent Cooper, no first name given. His questions were oddly specific. Had I noticed any strange lights or sounds? Did Mike mention feeling unusually hot or cold? Had I experienced any missing time? I answered as best I could, but my mind was reeling. What kind of federal agents asked questions like that? As dawn began to break, casting long shadows across the parking lot, the mood shifted. The initial urgency of the search gave way to a sort of resigned confusion. I overheard Officer Martinez on the phone trying to explain the situation to her superior. "No, sir, I can't explain it," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "We've got a missing trucker, a truck full of cargo, and not a single lead. It's like he just vanished." I was finally allowed to leave around 7 a.m., but not before Agent Cooper pulled me aside for one last chat. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice low and intense, "I need you to understand something. What happened here tonight? It's best if you don't discuss it too widely for your own sake." I bristled at that. "Are you threatening me?" He held up his hands, placating. "Not at all. I'm trying to protect you. There are things out there, Mr. Harrison, things that most people aren't equipped to understand. Sometimes it's better not to pull at those threads." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was a weariness there, a haunted quality that spoke of someone who'd seen too much. As I climbed into my rig, my head spinning with everything that had happened, Agent Cooper called out one last time. "Be careful out there, Mr. Harrison, and if you ever see anything unusual on the road, anything that doesn't quite add up, you call this number." He pressed a plain white business card into my hand. I pulled out of the rest area just as the morning sun was cresting the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It should have been beautiful, but all I felt was a deep, gnawing unease. In the days and weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I'd find myself lying awake in my sleeper berth, replaying every detail, searching for some clue I might have missed. I scoured news sites and trucker forums, looking for any mention of Big Mike or his distinctive red Kenworth. Nothing. It was like he'd never existed. I kept that white business card tucked in my wallet, a constant reminder that the world was stranger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Some nights, when the road stretched endlessly before me and the darkness pressed in from all sides, I'd find my hand drifting towards my phone, tempted to dial that number. But I never did. Part of me was afraid of what I might learn, of having my suspicions confirmed that there were things out there beyond our understanding. And part of me was afraid they might not pick up at all, so I keep driving, logging my miles and making my deliveries. But I'm more cautious now. I don't linger at rest areas after dark. I keep my eyes on the road and my mind on the job. And sometimes when I pass through eastern Arizona and see the sign for the Sunny Grove rest area, I say a little prayer for Big Mike, wherever he might be, in this world or another. Because out here on the open road, under a sky too big to comprehend, anything seems possible, even the impossible. And the first time I saw the man with the crooked smile, I thought nothing of it. The second time, I got an uneasy feeling in my gut. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. But by then, it was almost too late. My name's Jack, and I've been hauling freight across the country for going on 20 years now. I've seen my share of weird stuff out on the open road, things that'd make your hair stand on end. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened last summer along that lonely stretch of Highway 50 in Nevada. It was a scorcher of a day in July, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt and turns your rig into a rolling oven. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, pushing hard to make a delivery in Reno. My eyes felt like sandpaper, and I was running on nothing but gas station coffee and sheer stubbornness. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I spotted a sign for a truck stop coming up in 20 miles. Thank God, I thought. I needed fuel, both for my rig and for myself. The truck stop was one of those old rundown places you find scattered across the desert, the kind that's seen better days but still clings to life thanks to us long haulers who don't have much choice. As I pulled in, I noticed only a couple other rigs in the lot. Not unusual for this time of night in the middle of nowhere. I fueled up first, wincing at the price. Highway robbery, but what can you do? Then I headed inside, desperate for some real food and maybe a quick shower to wash off the road grime. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. Looked to be in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered face you get from spending too much time in the sun. But it was his smile that caught my attention. It was off somehow, crooked, yeah, but not in a natural way. More like someone had tried to carve a smile onto his face with a dull knife. I gave him a nod as I passed, the way you do, and he nodded back. But there was something in his eyes that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They were too bright, too intense, like a predator sizing up its prey. I shook it off, blaming my unease on exhaustion and too much caffeine. I wolfed down a plate of eggs and hash browns, took the quickest shower of my life, and got back on the road. By the time I hit Reno, I'd all but forgotten about the man with the crooked smile. 3 days later, I was heading back east on a different route. Middle of the afternoon, I pulled into a rest area in Utah to take a leak and stretch my legs. And there he was again. Same guy, same crooked smile, sitting on a bench and watching the cars go by. Now, I'm not one to believe in coincidences, especially not out here where the miles between towns can play tricks on your mind. But I told myself it had to be just that, a coincidence. Maybe he was a long hauler too, running a similar route. But when he turned and our eyes met, that same predatory gleam was there. And this time he smiled at me. A wide, unnatural grin that made my blood run cold. I hurried back to my rig and got the hell out of there, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. For the next 100 miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed. Every time I checked my mirrors, I half expected to see him right behind me. By the time I reached my next stop in Colorado, I'd managed to convince myself I was being paranoid. Lack of sleep, the loneliness of the road, it can do funny things to a man's mind. I resolved to get a good night's sleep at the motel and put the whole thing behind me. But as I was walking to my room, key in hand, I glanced across the parking lot, and there, leaning against a beat-up Ford pickup, was the man with the crooked smile. He raised a hand in greeting, that unnatural grin splitting his face. I nearly dropped my key, fumbling to get the door open. Once inside, I triple-checked the lock and pushed a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Sleep was out of the question now. I spent the night pacing, jumping at every sound, peering out the window at that pickup. When dawn finally broke, the pickup was gone. But my sense of unease remained. I called my dispatcher and told her I was taking a few personal days. She wasn't happy, but I'd built up enough goodwill over the years that she didn't argue too much. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell was going on. For 3 days, I holed up in that motel room, venturing out only for food and essentials. I scoured the internet for any news of strange happenings on the highways, missing truckers, anything that might explain what I was experiencing. I found more than I bargained for. There were whispered stories on trucker forums, posts that got deleted almost as soon as they went up. Tales of a man with an unnatural smile who seemed to show up everywhere, always watching, always following. And in his wake, truckers who disappeared without a trace. Some called him the Highway Phantom, others the Smiling Man. But the stories all ended the same way, with someone vanishing, their rig found abandoned at a rest stop or truck station. As I read account after account, a chill settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just happening to me, and it wasn't just paranoia or road fatigue. Something genuinely sinister was stalking the highways. On the 4th day, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I had deliveries to make, a life to get back to. And a small, defiant part of me refused to be driven off the road by fear. I checked out of the motel at dawn, my hands sweating as I gripped my keys. The parking lot was empty, no sign of the beat-up Ford. As I climbed into my rig, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was over. That hope didn't last long. About an hour into my drive, I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder of the highway, thumb out like he was hitching a ride. But that smile, God, that smile. It was wider than ever, stretched to impossible proportions. I sped past him, my heart pounding. In my mirror, I saw him shrink into the distance, but he never stopped smiling, never stopped watching. For the next several hours, it was like a twisted game of cat and mouse. Every time I thought I'd lost him, there he'd be, at a rest stop, a gas station, standing in the middle of a field by the roadside, always smiling, always watching. As night fell, my nerves were shot to hell. I was jumping at shadows, seeing that crooked smile in every reflective surface. I knew I needed to get off the road to find somewhere safe, but where? He seemed to be everywhere. That's when I remembered something from one of the forum posts. A trucker had mentioned a safe haven, a place where the Smiling Man couldn't reach. It was a long shot, but at this point I was out of options. I took the next exit, following a winding back road deep into the mountains. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt. My rig groaned in protest as I pushed it up steep inclines and around hairpin turns. Just when I was sure I'd made a horrible mistake, I saw it. A small truck stop nestled in a valley between two peaks. It looked ancient, like something out of another time. A hand-painted sign read, "Last Chance Truck Stop, All Welcome." As I pulled in, I saw other rigs parked haphazardly around the lot. Their drivers were gathered around a bonfire, and as I climbed down from my cab, they all turned to look at me. An old-timer with a beard down to his chest approached me. "You running from him, ain't you?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You're safe here, son. He can't come to this place. Don't ask me why. Some say it's holy ground, others say it's cursed. All I know is he stays away." That night, gathered around the fire with other drivers who'd had their own encounters with the Smiling Man, I finally felt the tension start to leave my body. We swapped stories, shared theories, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone. I stayed at the Last Chance for 3 days, sleeping in my rig and sharing meals with the other drivers. On the morning of the 4th day, the old-timer who'd greeted me approached my truck. "Time for you to go, son," he said solemnly. "Can't hide forever. The road's calling." I knew he was right. As much as I wanted to stay in this safe haven, I had a job to do, and I couldn't let fear rule my life. As I pulled out of the last chance, the old-timer's parting words echoed in my mind. Remember, you're not alone out there. We're all watching out for each other. I've been back on the road for a few months now. I haven't seen the smiling man again, but I know he's out there. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and the road stretches endlessly before me, I think I catch a glimpse of that crooked grin in my headlights. But I keep driving, because that's what we do. We keep the wheels turning, keep the country moving. And if something dark is haunting the highways, well, we'll face it together 1 mile at a time. So if you're ever out on the road and you see a man with an unnatural smile, don't stop, don't engage. Just keep driving and know that there are others out here watching your back. Stay safe and keep on trucking. They say the forests up north hide more than just trees and wildlife. Old legends whisper of creatures that stalk the shadows, hungry for human flesh. I never believed those stories, until the night I came face to face with a Wendigo. My name's Dave, and I've been hauling lumber out of the northern forest for close to 15 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me close to the wilderness I've always loved. Or at least I used to love it. These days, the deep woods fill me with a dread I can't shake. It all started last winter during one of the coldest Januaries on record. I was making a run from a logging camp in northern Minnesota down to a mill just outside of Duluth. It was the kind of cold that freezes your breath before it leaves your mouth, the kind that makes even the toughest loggers huddle close to their fires at night. I'd left the camp late, later than I should have. The foreman had begged me to wait until morning, said the roads were too dangerous after dark. But I had a schedule to keep and a reputation for always delivering on time. So I fired up my rig and headed out into the gathering gloom, the trees casting long shadows across the snow-packed logging road. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. The road was rough, but nothing my chains couldn't handle. I had the heat blasting and an old Johnny Cash album playing on the stereo. As the last light faded from the sky, I flicked on my high beams, cutting a swath through the darkness. That's when things started to get weird. It began with a feeling, just a prickling at the back of my neck like I was being watched. I chalked it up to nerves at first. Driving these back roads at night will do that to you. But as the miles rolled by, the feeling grew stronger. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Flashes of movement in the trees, gone as soon as I turned my head. Once I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, impossibly tall and thin. But when my headlights hit it, there was nothing there. My palms were sweating despite the cold, and I found myself checking my mirrors more often than the road ahead. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to snatch at my truck. Then I heard it, a sound that cut through the rumble of my engine and the twang of Johnny Cash. A howl, but not like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was high and keening, almost human, but wrong somehow. Like a person screaming in agony, but with an otherworldly echo that made my blood run cold. I hit the gas, pushing my rig as fast as I dared on the icy road. The howl came again, closer this time, and now I could see something loping through the trees parallel to the road. It was keeping pace with my truck, which was doing a good 50 miles an hour. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I fumbled for my CB radio, desperate to hear another human voice. But all I got was static and that awful howling, now coming through the speakers as if the thing was right there in the cab with me. I rounded a bend and there it was, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, but on the ice it was useless. I was skidding straight towards it at full speed. In the glare of my headlights, I got my first clear look at the creature. It was at least 8 feet tall, with limbs so long and thin they looked like they should snap under its weight. Its skin was a sickly grayish white, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, but its face... God, its face. A twisted parody of a human visage, with sunken black eyes and a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth opened in a silent scream. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. But instead of the crunch of metal, I felt my truck lurch to the side. I opened my eyes to find myself sliding off the road, heading straight for the tree line. The impact was brutal. My head slammed against the steering wheel, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was hanging sideways in my seatbelt, the cab of my truck wedged between 2 massive pines. For a moment, all I could hear was the hiss of steam from my ruined engine and the pounding of my own heart. Then through my shattered windshield, I saw it. The creature was approaching the truck, moving with an unnatural, jerky gait. Pure terror gave me the strength to fumble with my seatbelt and kick out what was left of the windshield. I tumbled out into the snow, the cold hitting me like a physical blow. But I didn't feel it. All I could focus on was getting away from that thing. I ran. I ran like I've never run before, plunging into the dark forest without a thought for where I was going. Branches whipped at my face, and I stumbled over hidden roots, but I didn't slow down. I could hear it behind me, that awful keening cry growing closer with each passing second. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that desperate flight through the woods. But eventually, my lungs burning and my legs feeling like lead, I spotted a glimmer of light through the trees. It was a cabin, old and decrepit, but with a warm glow spilling from its windows. I made a final desperate sprint for the door, risking a glance over my shoulder as I ran. The creature was right there, so close I could smell its rotten breath. Its long, clawed hand reached for me, brushing the back of my jacket. I hit the cabin door with my full weight, tumbling inside and slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my back against the wood, gasping for air, waiting for the thing to burst through. But nothing happened. No pounding on the door, no howls from outside, just silence. "You're safe now, son," a voice said, making me jump. I turned to see an old man sitting by a potbelly stove, a shotgun across his lap. "It can't come in here." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my whole body shaking. The old man nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Wendigo," he said, spitting the word like a curse. "Nasty things. Used to be human, you know. But they gave in to the hunger, the desperation. Now they roam these woods, always hunting, always hungry." I found my voice then, hoarse and shaky. What do they want?" The old man's eyes met mine, and I saw a deep sadness there. "Human flesh," he said simply. "They're cursed to crave it for all eternity." We sat in silence for a long while after that, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the stove. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I'd nearly died out there. Worse than died. As dawn began to break, painting the sky outside a pale gray, the old man stood up with a groan. "It's gone now," he said. "They can't abide the daylight. You'll be safe to leave, but—" He paused, fixing me with a stern look. "You remember what you saw out there, and you be careful in these woods from now on. The Wendigo, they've got a taste for you now. They'll remember your scent." He gave me a thermos of coffee and pointed me in the direction of the nearest town. It was a 5-mile hike through the snow, but after what I'd been through, it felt like a walk in the park. I reported my accident, of course, but I didn't say a word about what I'd seen. Who'd believe me? They'd think I'd hit my head too hard in the crash or that I was drunk or on drugs. I still drive these roads, still haul lumber from the northern forests, but never at night, never when the sun's low in the sky. And I keep my eyes on the trees now, watching for any sign of movement, because I know the truth now. I know what's out there, hiding in the shadows of the forest, and on cold, dark nights when the wind howls through the pines, I swear I can still hear that unearthly cry, the cry of the Wendigo, forever hungry, forever hunting. So if you find yourself on these lonely northern roads after dark, keep your doors locked and your eyes on the road. And if you hear a howl that sounds almost human but not quite, don't stop, don't look back, just drive and pray you make it to the dawn.